The topic tonight, examining America First, Nationalism, and Jacksonian democracy in the 20th century. All of these ideas, America First, Nationalism, Jacksonian democracy, in one way or another, have been associated with President Trump, his view of the world, and America's place within it. Let's just start then with Jacksonian democracy, which of course is the vision of democracy connected with the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. A little less than a month ago, at a midterm election rally in Tennessee, President Trump celebrated the fact that Andrew Jackson's image was still on the front side of the $20 bill. And while President Trump didn't say so explicitly, he was referring to the fact that Jackson's image on the $20 bill had not yet been replaced with the image of Harriet Tubman, the great African-American abolitionist of the 19th century. Some of you may know that under President Obama, it had been decided that Jackson's image would be replaced with Tubman's. President Trump said, well, no, he's still on the bill, and he was celebrating that. He also said at that rally that he was a big Andrew Jackson fan. Indeed, the president has a portrait of Andrew Jackson hanging on the wall of the Oval Office. And interestingly enough, it has been reported that you, Walter Russell Mead, are in some way responsible for the pictures hanging there and for President Trump's becoming a big fan of Andrew Jackson. What is going on here? How are we to understand the connections among Jackson, Jacksonian democracy, and President Trump, and what does all of this have to do with Walter Mead?
I remember nothing about that night. I'm sure I wasn't there. Obviously a Russian operation. No, I did, one day I was, sort of felt my phone vibrate, so, you always got to check with the precious, so I pulled out the phone, and it said, "Hi, this is Steve Bannon. Can we talk?" I thought, okay, which one of my ratty friends is trying to prank me? But it actually did turn out that was Steve Bannon, and he did want to talk. So I went down to see him. He was still with the government then. So it turns out that what he wanted to talk about was Andrew Jackson. In my book Special Providence, I wrote about how there are really 4 different ways of thinking about American foreign policy. We Americans are actually kind of boring. We've been having the same arguments about foreign policy since the 1790s. And we've had the same sort of ideas circulating around, and now one of them wins, now another. Hamiltonian foreign policy, let's have a strong federal government which promotes infrastructure, works with big companies to promote American commerce around the world, has a strong navy and a strong military, so America will be the world's greatest power and Americans will be safe. And that's the kind of, and rich, Hamiltonian idea. By the way, they were going for Hamilton's $10 bill portrait first, but then he made a very smart career move and had a Broadway musical done about him. This is what you've got to do if you're a founding father. You got to keep moving. Then Thomas Jefferson, another one of the founders, heard about what Hamilton wanted, said, "This is terrible. If we build this global commerce and big military forces, we're going to get into wars all over the world. The budget deficit is going to skyrocket. Taxes will go up. And also, because we have this global military operation, people out there are going to hate us. So we're going to have enemies in more wars. And then the government is going to be stuffed full of secrets. We're going to have a national security state. The people won't know what the money they pay in taxes is being used for by the secret services. That's not democracy. That's not America. What we need to do is stay out of trouble with other countries, stay home, keep our noses clean, don't let big corporations or even beautiful sounding human rights lobbies drag us into adventures overseas, and that's Jeffersonian foreign policy. Then you have Wilsonian foreign policy, human rights. America will never be safe at home until the entire world is democratic. So if we want to stay safe, like, for example, we have terrorism, well, the way to cure terrorism is to make the Middle East democratic. And if we do that, then we'll solve the problem of terror that causes terrorism, and then we'll be safe. So human rights policy isn't just, America helping other people because we're so noble and good. This is our interest, is to promote our values. That's Wilson. Well, Jackson's a little different. Andrew Jackson was a tough guy as president. I mean, he was known for the Trail of Tears, among other things, the decision to move the Eastern Indians to the beyond the Mississippi. I think he's a little bit of a bad rap on that, but still, it was something he was willing to do. He was. I'll give you an example of what Jackson thought was excellent foreign policy. And that was 1818. And there were these two British traders in what's now American Florida, but at the time was still Spanish Florida. And so not American territory. These British traders were selling arms and ammunition to the Indians who were fighting U.S. forces in Georgia, which Jackson was commanding these forces. Well, this was an outrage. Andrew Jackson sent the U.S. forces across the international frontier. International law? He sent them in. He arrested these British traders. He brought them back into the U.S. I think Guantanamo wasn't open yet, so that wasn't an option. He tried them before a military tribunal and then hanged them. Okay, that's everything the European Union hates about American foreign policy to this day. It made Andrew Jackson so popular that his election to the presidency was almost inevitable. So Jacksonianism is not about fighting for human rights. It's not about making other countries democratic or Christian or capitalist or anything else. Live and let live unless they attack the United States. And if they attack the United States, you got to crush them like bugs. And there's a lot of that in President Trump. Steve Bannon read this part of Special Providence, and he was so excited about that as capturing President Trump's vision, that he got President Trump soon after the inauguration to fly down to Andrew Jackson's house in Tennessee, and got Trump to hang that picture. So I have it's probably a small, cheap objective. I would like to get my selfie in front of that portrait of Andrew Jackson while it's still in the. So I hope the Mueller report doesn't come too quickly. I still need to get in there and get my picture.
What about Jackson, the man of the people? And
Well,
Trump seeing himself in some sense as the great populist hero and instrument of populist concerns and so forth.
Jackson is we like to think that our historical figures, we can put them into two little boxes. They're the bad people and the good people. Jackson is a very difficult person to do this with because on the one hand, he was a pretty racist guy and he was a slave owner. And he certainly was pretty ferocious in the Indian Wars. He was not a real friend of civil liberties generally. On the other hand, the fact that the American Republic shifted from being the kind of elite republic that the founders had set up to being a mass democratic society with mass political parties is really Andrew Jackson's doing more than any other person. That before Andrew Jackson, there were actually U.S. states that had higher property qualifications for voting than some of the seats in the English House of Commons. If you didn't have property worth X amount of money or didn't pay X amount in taxes, you couldn't vote. Jackson's movement got to, didn't go all the way, but it went to the, white, 21 years and older white males could all vote. And not only could all vote, could hold office. Jacksonianism was this very egalitarian movement. Educated people aren't better than uneducated people. The average person with common sense should be able to solve the problems of government. And so Jackson found a great many average people and put them into government jobs. Before Jackson, the federal bureaucracy was almost as good as being a university professor, with tenure. Jackson introduced the system. You just fire all the bureaucrats and you replace them with your own political supporters. This obviously helps you find the people, the volunteers, who will help you campaign for office, but it gives you control over the government function. Trump's hostility to educated elites and to the career civil service bureaucracy is right in line with Andrew Jackson's approach.
Interesting. Another thing that you identify in the book as associated with this Jacksonian approach to democracy is the idea that the primary moral community is the American folk community or American folk culture, and that the fundamental moral obligations that political leaders have are to fellow Americans.
Right.
Another recent event, I think it was last week, Trump, I think it was at a political rally for Ted Cruz. They've patched some things up since the primary election, and Trump was there on his behalf. And there he called himself a nationalist in contrast with a globalist, is the way he put it. A globalist, he said, I'm talking about Trump now, I'm quoting, wants the globe to do well, frankly not caring about our country so much, end of quote. And then about the term nationalist, he said, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what? I'm a nationalist. And of course, in a typically Trump way, it was sort of an in-your-face proposal. Now, some of Trump's critics have vehemently objected to his use of the term nationalism, suggesting it's a dog whistle for white nationalism. Others, even some liberal commentators who are generally critical of Trump, generally have argued that while nationalism can go wrong, say in the case of Nazi Germany, there are good as well as bad forms of nationalism. So I'm just wondering, how do you see this as another expression of this Jacksonian democratic tradition? And if so, how do you think we ought to be thinking about the use of the term nationalism as we try to understand political obligations, political community, and so forth?
Yeah. Actually, if you want to read a good book on nationalism, a good short book on nationalism, John Judas, who is...
He's the liberal. He's the liberal.
Right, he's a liberal, more than liberal, more on the left than liberal, right, who argues actually that without a sense of community among the citizens of a polity, and there's that a sense of there's a we here. You don't get social welfare states, you don't get a dedication to the common good, that the idea of the positive concept of nationalism is indispensable for any serious progressive political agenda. So I actually would agree with John about that. Trump, how Trump uses nationalism, how Trump uses any word, Trump is campaigning, and he is doing things that, in his kind of intuitive way, he thinks will help him reach a group of voters or and this is something Trump loves to do, he loves to make his critics look stupid by sending them into a knee-jerk response. The great example for me of this was when he started talking about America First. This was back in the 2016 campaign. And looking around the room, I realized for some of you, that was a very long time ago. But anyway, Trump goes America first. Now, all these commentators say, oh my goodness, this is what Charles Lindbergh said in the 1940s and it's Nazi associated and so on. Now, how many people at a Trump rally do you think have studied the political biography of Charles Lindbergh in 1940? None. How much attention do you think Donald Trump has devoted to the politics of Charles Lindbergh? Maybe a little more than that, but essentially none. But here's the thing. Once you've said, when he says, as your president, I'm going to put America first, and then you see all of these critics of Trump going, horror, the horror. For the average person listening to that, you go, well, wait a minute, what is it? America second? America third? What is first for you if it's not the United States? And why do I want a president of the United States who wouldn't make America first? That's the job. So he is great at this kind of language that educated people feeling infinitely superior to him and all the yahoos who vote for him immediately make themselves look like unbelievable stupid idiots in front of those yahoos, who then also will have no intention for taking their views of Trump or anything else. And I think nationalism is one of these words that, insofar as the average person's thought about it at all, well, yeah, we are a nation, the United States, and you should be for your nation. So I guess I'm a nationalist. I don't know. Oh, you mean really there were these French ultra-nationalist writers in the 1920s who used the word in a discriminatory sense? Pathetic. All right? So I don't know that Trump was so much making a specific political use of language as he was simply trying to make his critics look bad. And when you're him, you have to make your critics look bad. Otherwise, people look at you.
If I could just play devil's advocate for a moment.
Professor.
Isn't it true that even before he began campaigning, going all the way back, 20, 25 years, that Trump was articulating a certain critique of American policy with respect to trade, tariffs, and this kind of thing, which weren't entirely inconsistent with some of the ways that he's talking about now? You'd see him on the Oprah show and so forth. He says,
well, you probably watch the Oprah show more than I do, Professor.
On YouTube.
I'm a mere columnist.
In retrospect, on YouTube.
For research.
Yeah. Right. Isn't there, I guess what I'm asking, isn't there a kind of core to Trump where there is some continuity between what he was saying in the campaign context and what he had said?
He is certainly what I would say that he's telling the truth when he says I'm a nationalist, not a globalist. And I think there is such a thing as a globalist. And that, that is somebody who thinks it is obsolete to think of nations as the sort of leading agents in human betterment. The nation state might have been a good thing 100 years ago or whatever, but we have to transcend that now to something bigger. But in some ways, this is about the economic policies of the last 25 years, where if you go read a globalist magazine like The Economist or some others, and people are talking about, why have the last 25 years been good? They'll say, never in the history of the world have so many people come out of poverty. Infant mortality rates are down 50%. And this is all true, by the way. That it's been the years since 1990, the world as a whole has never seen so much economic progress for so many poor people on such a scale. But if you look at the middle class of advanced countries like the United States, many in Europe, it's a very different story. Now, a globalist might look at that and say, well, it's too bad, but actually, the American middle class is basically in the top 10% globally, and which is more important, that the bottom 20% are coming up, or that the top 10% are having a bad time, right? And what Trump is saying to the American people, I think, to his voters, is that what we need is a president who, is not going to try to like stomp on the rest of the world in some kind of harsh, like, I want you to be poor kind of way, but just, no, you're the people who vote for me, and my job is to look out for you, not to look out for the people in India and China and Kenya, but for you. And he's had obviously a certain response to that. Now, whether or not he's doing that or can do that or has any clue how to do it, that's all another question. But I think it is true that a number of politicians have embraced the idea that the job of the American leadership elite is to lead a global movement of improvement rather than a national movement of improvement.
Is on the issue of America First, is there any real difference between, say, this Jacksonian perspective and Hamilton, maybe the Wilsonian, with that sort of ideal sense, you've got to transform the globe in a kind of democratic direction. That has a kind of other regarding element to it. But, I mean, the Hamiltonians were interested in promoting American interests. There was a kind of disagreement between the Hamiltonians and some others about how one would do that. And even with respect to the Jeffersonian approach, they're not going to deny that it's in America's interest to pull in the drawbridges and to forget about what's going on in Europe. And
that's right.
that
No,
kind of thing.
I think if we look at American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, up until 2017 when Trump took office, it was basically a coalition of Wilsonians and Hamiltonians. That is, when the Soviet Union fell, the kind of American foreign policy establishment and political establishment said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take what we built in the free world in the rich part of the free world during the Cold War, and we're now going to extend this globally. So we're going to make Eastern Europe look like Western Europe. And we're going to promote the rapid industrialization of developing countries all over the world. And we're also, and that will create jobs. We're going to promote democracy, and we're going to promote economic change and development. And that actually meant a very aggressive and detailed American foreign policy. It meant promoting things like the creation of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. It meant the U.S. getting involved on a much greater level in foreign aid, economic development. Now, for Jacksonians and to some degree Jeffersonians, it made sense for the U.S. global involvement during the Cold War wasn't actually about we're going to make a better world. It was we need to do something so the communists don't win. So like there's some African dictator, Mobutu, in what was in Zaire, now Democratic Republic of Congo. You've noticed, by the way, I hope, that the more adjectives like that something has in it, the less it is. The top example is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. But Democratic Republic of Zaire, of the Congo, is none of those things. So, and it was like, and Congress would go, we don't want to give him any foreign aid. He's a crooked tyrant. He'll send it right to Switzerland. And at which point the Secretary of State would say, you're right, he's a crooked tyrant, he'll send it to Switzerland. But if we don't help him, the Russians will. And then, their influence will grow, and that'll be bad for us in Africa. So all the Jacksonian foreign aid-hating congressmen said, fine, here's the check. All right, when the Cold War ended, why write the check? The establishment is saying, this is our chance to go out and do more good and build a bigger world order. But the Jacksonians are saying, hey, now we can stop all of that falderall and get back to spending money on good old Americans at home. And for between 1990 and 2016, we had this division where a lot of people in the country wanted less foreign policy, but the foreign policy establishment was chasing this very beautiful, glittering vision of what George H.W. Bush, of all people, called the New World Order.
Now might be a good time to entertain questions from the larger audience. If there are questions, please raise your hands, and someone with a mic will come. There's a question here. While we're doing that, you did publish an article last week which surprised me a little bit in the Wall Street Journal, where you said that Trump's foreign policy was not isolationist.
Right.
And that sounded to me less Jacksonian, that he was more reaching out in the way that maybe the Bush administration, Bush II, was reaching out. Did you mean that?
No, no.
How do
You can be unilateralist and isolationist are not the same thing. What I'm saying is Trump sees security threats all over the planet. So there are terrorists in the Middle East. We have to reach out and crush them. There is China, which is a threat. There is the Russian ignoring or breaking the INF treaty, and we have to respond. So if you look at it, Trump is simultaneously taking on China, Russia, and Iran. That's not Jeffersonian, that's Jacksonian.